in some ways we need to talk less about Bitcoin itself and more about find out what problems people have got, or what problems may occur because of the fragile monetary system we have, and how can we then solve those problems. The fact this is called Bitcoin is kind of is a side issue, really. We should be focusing on helping people solve their problems.
Sam, welcome back onto the podcast. How you doing?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming back on. We were just saying the last time you were on the podcast was just after the announcement of the UK pension fund allocating Bitcoin, or 3% Bitcoin, and you and Cartwright were a big part of that. So how long ago was it that happened?
It feels like years ago. It was November 24, and you did a great job of being the first podcast to have me on and talk about it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I made sure that I was in there first as soon as the news came out. Yeah. That podcast actually popped off, and because it was big news in the UK for that to happen. Because I think we'd kind of seen it happening in the US, but for that to actually happen in the UK was unheard of. Well done getting that over the line. But yeah, that's a while since you've been on the pod. So, and we talk quite a lot anyway. So it's about time that you're back on, because there's lots to catch up on. So this is where I think we start, and then we'll take a winding journey through, and hopefully we end up, in a, I don't know where we end up.
Where we started? I don't know what you're going to say.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know what I was going to say either. But this was my thinking when it was like thinking through, like, what do I want to ask you? What do the people listening want to hear, and all of this? So the way I want to start this podcast is, like, most people have like a workplace pension, but I think a lot of people don't actually know what actually happens behind the scenes in the background. They just see it on their payslip, and it's just like, okay, well, that's going into my pension. Are you able to give like behind the scenes of like, where does that money actually go, and what do the pension funds do with that money?
So I'll try. So so it's quite complicated. So whereas a lot of people who listen to your podcast will have some Bitcoin, they'll have bought some Bitcoin, hopefully put it in self-custody or something very similar, and then it'll just sit there. And that's fine. But good even. But pensions is more complicated because there's more stuff going on, and there's more people involved. And there's more layers to it about where your money is ending up. And that's actually one of the big problems I have with a lot of, particularly we're going to talk about defined contribution pensions. I think on the previous podcast, we distinguished between defined benefit and defined contribution. So
I think we did as well.
Yeah. So very briefly there, defined benefit is where you're promised a certain level of pension, normally a percentage of your salary when you retire. And that pension is then paid for the rest of your life. No one knows exactly how much that is going to cost because no one knows exactly how long you're going to live. The other key one is the defined contribution, which is the company and the employee put some money in a pot. It's invested. The pension is whatever that pot buys when you get to retirement. So, had you made that last to as long as you live? That is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later, actually, because there is a solution to that. So we're going to focus on the defined contribution aspect just to try and keep things simple here. So virtually everyone pays some kind of pension contributions, where do they go? So they normally go through some kind of pension provider. So these could be large insurers. We have something called master trusts in the UK. So they're a little bit like the superannuation funds that they have in Australia. And so they're big organizations that take these contributions in. They then go into normally what is a default investment option. And as a member of that pension scheme, pension plan, you can choose normally to put the money into something else. So, for example, the default option might include equities and bonds and property, but you say, I don't want any property or bonds, I just want equities. There's normally an option to choose for just equities. And should be some other options too. Interestingly, at the moment, there isn't a Bitcoin option. There's rarely a gold option either, or a bold option, the combination of the two. However, hopefully that's something that will change soon. So that money then goes from the trust, normally set up as a trust, and then goes into to a fund manager who then invests in one of their funds. So it's like a pooled vehicle where lots of investors can invest together. It's quite good from an economies of scale point of view. And they'll invest it according to what their mandate is, what they've been told to do, how that fund's set up. So that could end up in the bond market or property market or the equity market, depending on those instructions. And so let's say the equities. So that goes into the stock market and essentially is effectively that money works its way through to the companies themselves that are listed on the stock market. And they're then investing in their business in some way. It's going to depend on which companies, of course, exactly what their business is, what they do, how that money is invested. So there's quite a long chain of decisions and quite a few layers. And I don't think that many people actually understand all those layers, which I guess is the point of your question. And it makes it quite complicated. And so one of the big concerns I have is that people invest in things they don't really understand. It's just their pension. But that's the way that things are set up right now.
Yeah, that was my my thought process behind it. Is like, I think a lot of people just think, oh, I'm just putting this in my pension and that's it, and not really like thinking about where that money actually goes. And so because you say like there's so many layers to it, and like if you could redesign this like whole process, what would you change first, or how would you look at it, or how would you approach it?
Well, that's quite a big question. So
the whole pension world, how would you change it?
One thing, one solution.
You can pick one thing.
So principles, I would go back to something that I've talked about a few times in the past, which is there's three things you can do with your money. You can spend it, you can save it, or you can invest it. And the problem we've had for, well, particularly almost 55 years, but actually longer than that really, is that the savings vehicle isn't very good. So but basically the primary option has been government currency, and it's not a good savings vehicle. So what does that mean? That means people spend money on stuff they don't need, or they invest in stuff they don't understand. Neither of them is obviously a good situation to be in. So now that we have gold's coming back into its own somewhat. That's helpful. We've obviously got Bitcoin. We've now got a more serious savings options. So that should mean that people stop spending on stuff they don't need, stop investing in things they don't understand. However, a lot of that money, particularly on the investment side, is trapped in certain vehicles. And so you can't just take it out and put it somewhere else. So we're going to have to go through a process, and it's going to take quite a few years, I think. As new solutions come up, people divert money to these new solutions, and the old systems consolidate and wind down in some circumstances. So what would I do to change the pension system? I'd want to see people able to invest in things they can understand. And actually, for a lot of people, it's not, if you're investing in inverted commas in Bitcoin, okay, it might sort of, you might think of it as investing because it's through an investment account. There's going to be some people who, for whatever reason, it's easier to buy an ETF or something like that. And up to a point, that's fine. But for most people, I imagine if we look ahead 20, 30 years, I imagine there'll be lots of people who will be just saving in hard money. They'll still invest a bit, maybe for legacy reasons, but that'll be much lower. And that'll be fine because they don't need to invest. They don't need to try and beat inflation with investing in stuff they don't understand, because they'll have a form of money that they sufficiently understand and trust. In the same way that they drive a car now, and they get from A to B, they'll have Bitcoin to do that for saving.
How would you? So, I'm literally just thinking around this question right now. Is as we talked about the theme of like just resilience within institutions, within business, and like that's what we'll be talking about throughout this episode. But how do you see that? Do you think AI is actually accelerating this shift, maybe to looking at hard money more? Because if you look at the stock market or equities right now, like it's so volatile. Like some stocks are just plummeting because of the influence of AI, and it's just taking over like roles that previously were a company would do. Do you think like as people integrate AI into their lives, their businesses, everything like that, it'll actually push people more towards hard money, like you're talking about there, of gold and Bitcoin? I've not fully formed that question, but do you understand the way I'm going? Because I've just been thinking off the top of my head. Because I'm looking at like the likes of like Klarna is a recent one, and Salesforce, and all these stocks are just plummeting. And I'm looking now the things I can do with AI, that I can build these things that previously I would have been getting a subscription for these companies for. But now I can build it. And I think like maybe that actually, do you think that influences where people put their money?
So yes, is the short answer, but why? I think we're heading to a world, I think things change gradually for long periods of time, and then suddenly they change quite quickly. But when they change quickly, it's not as though the direction is changing. It's just the speed at which we get there, or we get closer to that, the next stage. So does AI change that outcome? No, not particularly, but I think it massively condenses and speeds up the product, how the economy changes over that period. So,
yeah, I was just going to say, because just to chip in there, it was like, because the developments with AI are they're exponential at the moment, like changes like coming out every couple of months, and like the things you can do is insane. So it's like people don't feel as safe having their money in a certain, let's just say, company, than they probably did before, because as you said, that speed is accelerating.
So it speeds up the productivity growth, but as Jeff Booth has very well articulated, that actually speeds up the money creation needed to avoid the debt defaults that we would otherwise see if we didn't have that. Obviously, that's all. You can say, well, maybe that's bad to have AI, but the problem is that problem is going to happen anyway. The problem has already been created. The only question really is how quickly we have to go through the pain to sort the problem out. That has already happened. So there may be some benefits actually in terms of getting through that more quickly. I mean, that makes me a little bit concerned because there's a lot of people I think, and this I guess comes back to the resilience point. There's a lot of people who are not at all prepared for this. And even those of us that think we're prepared are probably not prepared enough. So we're going to have to get our act together increasingly over the coming years as we realize, actually, I haven't thought about this or I haven't thought about that. So, but if we can get through that stage where AI accelerates it, then we can get to a more beautiful, fair, equitable, equal, at least in terms of opportunity, place that much quicker. There's been various theories, haven't there, over the years about how quickly it might take to get to a Bitcoin standard. And so my view has been that, well, yeah, it probably will take longer than we think, but I hope it doesn't take too long because I'd really like to experience what it's like on the other side. So I think AI helps me out a bit in terms of that. But, if it was to happen today, then there's going to be a lot of damage done unnecessarily because so many people's mindset they're not in the right place. It's going to blow their minds in terms of what change. We know how much, if anyone that goes through the Bitcoin journey, it blows your mind in terms of looking at things in a very different way. Imagine having to concertina that whatever it's taken you, 3, 4, 10 years, whatever it is, concertina in that within a week. I mean, good grief, that's going to be hard.
That would be carnage.
Yeah.
And I actually said this because I was on someone else's podcast the other day, and or it was more like a webinar, an interactive, and it's really hard to have that conversation with people who don't fully understand Bitcoin around just talking about a deflationary world. And I had to say at the start, I was like, this is going to sound crazy because I remember when I first heard it, I thought that person was crazy. And I was like, no way is this going to happen. And here's me years later saying exactly the same thing of, if we move from an inflationary environment to a deflationary environment, and we're living on a Bitcoin standard, let's say, the price of everything that we're used to won't be going up, it will be coming down. And I have to always ease people into that. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, this is going to be a bit of a mind fuck, but please just go and read this book. And I always just point them towards The Price of Tomorrow, because that was the thing that helped me also just look at the world of what if the world actually looked like this. And I think that's quite an important question to ask yourself when it comes to anything, even AI and space travel, whatever it is. It's what if the world would look like this, could look like this?
And I think it's really easy for anyone listening to this that's thinking, what on earth are you talking about? It's very easy to find it a bit daunting, but bear in mind that we've all come from the same place, right? We've all come from, in our own way, where we've stumbled across Bitcoin and thought that's ridiculous. or impossible or a scam for whatever reason, bad for the environment, only drug dealers use it, whatever headline or was read about at the time, and just taken the time to go through those in detail and look behind the headline. And then little by little, you realize that the truth is very different to the headline. And everyone needs to do that in their own way, in their own, because everyone's had different life experience to get to that point. But don't be worried about taking that first step, because everyone's done exactly the same thing.
So since you were last on, I'm going to keep us on like that theme of resilience, like within institutions, because you talk to and work with so many different institutions and corporations and businesses. So like since you were last on, have you seen any shift in how institutions think about, let's just say, risk? Because even though it was like a year and a half ago that you were on, maybe not even a year and a half ago, like the world has changed quite a lot since then. Have you seen any shift from your end, from institutions?
Yes, a bit. So I think we're still very early in terms of this process of institutions getting their head around what the risks are, and why they need to be acted. But I think there's a greater level of concern now than there was even only a year or year and a half ago. And that's good. That's healthy, as long as it's done in a constructive way. Now, one of the reasons why it's taken quite a long time is because some of the things that we're familiar with around in Bitcoin land about the fragility of the fiat monetary system and things like that, that's not what people are taught through professional exams at university, economics at school. And so it takes quite a bit of time, understandably, to sort of put what you've learnt to one side and say, well, hang on, there's a different way of looking at this. And then comparing and contrasting. So we're seeing, we are starting to see now, increasingly, to your point, some of that fragility come through. So we're seeing it. I've scribbled down a few things here. And this is all over the last few years, because it takes, if some news comes out, whatever it's on, then the first reaction is, oh, it's just a one-off, or there'd be a bigger story, but I haven't got time to look at it right now. But as we start to see a pattern, then more and more people, of course, sort of open their eyes to it. So we've obviously seen rising prices, falling living standards, rising wealth and income inequality, depending exactly how you measure it. We've seen, I think, more volatility in bonds and equities. Bonds is the interesting one, because, of course, we had 40 years where bond yields a little bit up and down, but generally were going down. And then we had 21 and 2022. Autumn 22 was important from UK point of view. But we've had similar, look at Japanese bond yields now, where they're rising quite sharply. That's all those companies that made investments based on lower rates are now having to rethink. But it takes time to work through the system, because they probably took out a fixed rate loan, got to come to the end of that loan before you refinance and so on. So it takes time to come through. Central banks obviously have been very active in the past. They seem to try and take a little bit of a break, but they now seem to be starting to dabble a lot more in the markets. And that's just the stuff we see and is public. We got highest tax rates ever. So the Laffer curve essentially have we hit that peak? Probably there or thereabouts, aren't we? And that's sort of leading to people leaving the UK or other countries for good reason, logical. I mean, we see people say, well, actually, this particular survey, it's a bit biased, or it's a bit marketing, or it's not, actually the situation is more complicated. And that can be true, of course, but what that fails to allow for is actually, if you're looking 5 minutes ahead, then some of these indicators you think, well, it's probably just a blip. But actually, if you look at the reasons for why these things are happening and you extend them out by years, then it becomes pretty clear that nothing's guaranteed, but there's a pretty good chance that if things carry on as they are in the UK, people will continue to, particularly the business owners and higher paid, will find it more and more attractive to say, I've had enough. So you got things like that. We got crack up boom vibes. You look at meme coins.
All right.
You look
I was
at
like, what's
flea
that?
markets. As crack up boom is Austrian economics. Mises, I think, was particularly talking about it. And so what it describes is a situation where the money is breaking down quite fast, right? So but it's hard to notice it at face value. So it looks like, because people are trying to get rid of the cash quicker, it looks as though there's an economic boom, but it's not a sustainable one or one based on good fundamentals. It's based on people just trying to get rid of the cash before it loses value too quickly. And then it massively incentivizes speculation and gambling and things. Speculation is probably a bit of a nuanced word, but certainly incentivizes gambling and just taking lots of risks just to try and stay ahead. So I think meme coins fit pretty well into that.
Yeah.
As I had a whole list of things here, but a gold and silver price is probably worth explicitly mentioning, as well as the change in geopolitics. You look at what's happening with Venezuela, with Greenland. Who knows exactly how those are each going to turn out. Iran seems to be in the news quite a bit at the moment, worryingly. So you've got a lot of geopolitics going on, which makes sense as we move more into a multipolar world. So the point of listing all those things out is that why is the fragility of the fiat monetary system important now? Because it seems to be cracking up now and the chicken's coming home to roost. This has been building up for 55 years. But it doesn't mean that the effects are felt. It feels quite good to start with because everyone feels a bit richer and we go through some ups and downs and then it gets really serious. Is this the really serious point? We don't know. No one knows. But that's the point of being resilient, is that if it is really serious now, then you've got a plan B, or you're not entirely reliant on the current system that everyone uses. You've got a backup. Maybe it'll be another 5 years, maybe another 10 years. Who knows? But that's the point about resilience. You can work your way through these difficult periods.
It's like even on a personal level, it's once you know. I know everyone says this, but it's like once you know the problem, it's just like, right, okay, well, how do I protect myself against this? And nobody knows what you're saying is like nobody knows when it will happen. Like the worst point of it. It's that whole, I reference it quite a lot, like the fourth turning. Like they usually end in wars, and a war is an excuse to just print loads of money, and that then leads to a reset.
And distract.
Yeah, exactly. To what actually is happening with the money behind the scenes. And I would recommend anyone that's listening, and I want to get your take on this as well, is I really like the book Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. If people aren't readers, they're not into reading, there is like also I want to say like a 50-minute video on it, animated, and it's got like, I want to say like 60 million views or something, on YouTube alone. But he's recently come out because he's been pushing for gold and recently Bitcoin over the past few years. I think he said even up to like 15% of your portfolio should be Bitcoin. You need to fact check me on that. Pretty sure he did. But yeah, he recently also came out and said the the world order is changing now, which you can kind of see it like happening. All those things that you're listing off there, they are like seismic shifts in multiple different areas of the world. So coming on to my actual question around like institutions and businesses that you're working with and you're seeing, like, are a lot more of them turning to like defense mode, and being like, all right, okay, how do we protect ourselves going into this period? Is that how they're viewing it, or is that
I
just
don't
us?
think we're anywhere near that yet.
Okay.
I mean, there obviously are some that are thinking like that, but it's still tiny, and I don't think it's anywhere near. If that very serious situation was to hit tomorrow, I don't think we're anywhere near, as a sort of country, anywhere near well prepared enough for it. So what that means is that there would then be panic because something had happened that didn't fit the models that they were expecting, whether it's a mental model or whether it's a computer model. So that is so I think that's a really big problem. So what I'd love to see more of over the next months is many more companies, charities, and indeed on the pension side too, where they're just thinking more about these risks. There are certain risks that Bitcoin, if held in the right way, that help to mitigate, which you're not currently mitigating already. And so, for example, it could be counterparty risk. So if you've got all your cash in a bank, then there's obviously the risk that you've got the risk of inflation, in which those pounds may be worth less or have lower purchasing power, but also you've got the counterparty risk of the bank itself. Whereas if you then counterbalance that to Bitcoin, held without counterparty risk, you're dealing with both of those risks. You're taking on more volatility risk in the shorter term, which you haven't got on the fiat side. But anyway, so it's just about thinking through and thinking about it as a portfolio, not panicking because one asset that's a small part of the portfolio happens to have a volatile price.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I want to move us on to a company that is becoming very resilient, moving into whatever is ahead. And yeah, you've recently become, is it non-exec chairman at
Correct.
XE? Congrats, firstly. But yeah, can you just talk a little bit about that? And like, one, what is XE? We've had Scott on before. So anyone that's listening, you can go and listen to the founder and the CEO of XE. But yeah, what's your role involve within XE, and how are they becoming more resilient as a company?
Yeah. So my role is non-executive chairman. So it's helping to support Scott as being part of that board alongside some fantastic people, Richard Boworth and VJ being two of them, and Angus is the FD. So we've got a really great board there, and Scott is a force of nature in terms of just who he is and how he approaches everything. It's amazing to work with him. So it's a lot of it is just being a sounding board for ideas and what we can do, and just helping to keep things steadily moving in the right direction. So there's a Bitcoin executive search division that now was created, and I love this because I think this not only, it's a really important role in the industry generally. So I think this not only makes XCE, or Spencer Riley being the flagship executive search company owned by XCE, not only makes Spencer Riley and XCE more resilient because it's a need for a good few years to get more Bitcoin knowledge into companies. but it also accelerates the industry as well. We see lots of different companies coming from different directions to do their own thing, maybe their own expertise, but infused with Bitcoin. And this is one of the ways, which I think is really important. So that's why when Scott first talked to me, I was very excited by it. The other way that they're strengthening the business is through rewarding staff with essentially with shares, but with Bitcoin related performance payments there. So that is another way to help people to, first of all, understand what Bitcoin is, but also think longer term. And we know that decisions are made better and that if they are thought about what's the implications, positive and negative, over the longer term. So whoever you are, if you're the longer term your decisions are, the better they should be. And if you think of that, integrating with everyone else's decisions being longer term, you have exponential improvements in how the industry is moving forward. So, yeah, I mean, from my point of view, obviously I'm biased, but there's so much to like about XC's important role within the Bitcoin community, but also within the wider economy, global as well.
Yeah, I think that's the bit. Also, the bit that really stood out to me was around how it helps, or how they can help push Bitcoin adoption forward. And like everything we're trying to do at the Bitcoin Collective is like normalize Bitcoin a lot more. And I think that really helps by being able to get Bitcoin rules within businesses and get Bitcoiners within businesses to then help them with that resilience.
Yeah.
And like that's a nice new aspect to the business at Spencer Riley. And I get always I get confused now. There's two, but yeah, like you talked about this. When was that event? The one that was at the Law Society?
Yeah, it was maybe 11 months ago. Yeah.
11 months ago. Yeah. I remember very vividly you standing on stage and doing a presentation around, and this was before all of that we were talking about there with XE, of like Chief Bitcoin Officer, and like what you thought that role was and how you see it, what you see this role as. Can you
Yeah.
dive into that? Because I think this is so, like, whenever I'm like going back to the what if, it's like, okay, well, imagining what the world will look like or could look like. And I do believe I'm the same as you, like businesses will have these positions, chief Bitcoin officer and whatever else evolves from that. Could you just explain it a little bit? And then also, how do you see it in the future? What that role encompasses?
Yeah. So the core of it is that there is a need, and it goes back to this resilience theme, right? There's a need for much more Bitcoin knowledge within companies and charities and pension schemes. And I focus on the CBO role is really about companies and charities, so I'll focus on them. Much more knowledge is needed going into what I expect to be a very turbulent few years. You mentioned Ray Dalio and the fourth turning, so there'd be good resources to spot up on that. So the question is how do we get the knowledge into those companies? How do companies wave their hand and say, hey, I need some help here on something that I don't know enough about? The analogy would be, if we were to go back in time with the emergence of the internet, a lot of the time it was people kind of making stuff up as they went along, and that was fine up to a point. It was very new, but we know now we've got the comparison of what happened with the internet, and that could have been done better and quicker if we'd got on top of it at the time. And Bitcoin is even more important than the internet, I would argue, because it's money, because it affects everything that it touches in terms of capital allocation and how money is moved, how value is moved around throughout the economy. So it's incredibly important. So there's quite a few different angles that any company could take on Bitcoin, and each of them are going to have their own priorities and their own way in which they want to implement them. The question is, how do they work out what they should be doing and what they should prioritize? So I think there's a couple of different ways in which, well, maybe it's three ways in which that could happen, right? So they might have someone internally already that has got a good level of Bitcoin knowledge and can put their hand up and be the person to go to for this. I mean, that would be an amazing, if it's the right company that is sufficiently open-minded, and not all are, sadly, then that is a great opportunity for that person in that business to really have an impact. Second way is they could hire someone, so hire an advisor to talk to them about it and help to advise them on what they should be doing. That's a way of helping to accelerate Bitcoin being integrated. And then the third way is someone in-house to help us to do that. Maybe it's a more cost-efficient way of doing it. In which case, obviously, the first people I'm going to do is connect them with the Bitcoin Executive Search Division at XCE so that they can get the right person in. And so I think those are the three ways in which we'll get Bitcoin knowledge into companies and charities as quickly as possible, but maybe other things will happen instead as well.
How do you think this is now? We're now looking into the future and looking at businesses. How, because we've talked about like integrating Bitcoin, into like their treasury. But what other ways do you think that they'll be integrating Bitcoin? Because it's not just going to be like, or the way I envision it is not just going to be like this person is just, or this chief Bitcoin officer or the advisor coming in isn't, well, in the future, maybe it is just at the moment it's like focused on treasury, but in the future, I think things will evolve. And I'm just thinking back to, it was maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when strategy was MicroStrategy back then. They started a program internally that was between staff that they could send Bitcoin to each other. And I think people forget about this, and new people into Bitcoin won't realize that they did this. I don't know if it's still live or what's happening with it, but that was just an interesting thing, maybe before its time. I remember that they were piloting paying their employees in sats, so Bitcoin, to watch videos, like mandatory videos like CPD or come to X meetings. They were like trialing it out quite a lot. What's your vision? Like, what do you think companies will do in the future to integrate Bitcoin? I realize we're talking hypothetically here.
Yeah, no, sure. But a lot of this may well happen. So I think the way to think about it, the principle is, where does money touch your business? I think that's the starting point. And so anywhere where it does, Bitcoin could play a role. And the timing of exactly when it does will obviously depend on lots of things. So where does money touch business? Well, we've talked about if you're holding assets on your balance sheet, that's obviously one. But then you've got payments in and out. So merchant payments. So you're receiving payments from customers. How do they want to pay? Are you opening yourself up to a new customer base if you also allow Bitcoin payments? What about paying your staff? You sort of alluded to it there, which is like an internal incentives, employee incentives. But it could also be payroll itself. And maybe that just starts off with a small amount every month. I'd quite like to see where employers can say, going back to my earlier point about people investing in things they don't understand, is saying, well, at the moment we pay you X% in pension contributions, we're agnostic as to whether that X% is paid into your pension or is paid in Bitcoin. It's up to the employee to. So I like things like that. I think there's some road in that. What about paying between different subsidiaries within the same company, or paying suppliers? What if they're overseas? So cross-border payments. If you go via the Bitcoin payment rails, I mentioned Bitcoin mining. A lot of companies will find they've got a cost in the corner of their company where they're just wasting electricity for no apparent reason, just legacy reasons. Well, now they can turn it into a revenue stream rather than a cost. And so there's probably some others that skip my mind, but there's a few to be working with. Things like, well, going back to your topic about AI. So agentic AI, I think it's called, so it might be, let's picture something. So we've got a manufacturing firm. They've got big supply lines, right? There's so many different parts. They say it's, I don't know, they make some kind of machine or cars or other vehicles. They actually want to have AI to go and find the cheapest parts. But that AI is probably going to want to need to use Bitcoin on Lightning to actually pay for those parts, because it's all done so quickly. So that might be one. And that, I think that feels very early on that, but that's looking a few years ahead. Although with AI as it is, I mean, who knows? It could be next week.
True. Yeah, the way things are going, that's another whole rabbit hole that I probably will get into on a different episode, around, because understanding the how Bitcoin's going to use AI, or how AI is going to use Bitcoin, like AI agents, and I still don't fully understand. I've had one person on maybe like 2 years ago talking about it. I still don't really understand it. But I get the concept of it. I do believe like that it makes sense for AI to use an internet native money to interact. I would agree with that whole list, and I've been trying to think of others as well, but I think you rattled off quite a few that I was thinking as well, of like how I can see businesses integrating Bitcoin in the future. Also, the thing is, like, Bitcoin in the UK, like, specifically, because I think both of us currently like focus down on the UK, and like we work together, like a lot of people within Bitcoin land, let's just say, work together. And like, yes, like you deal with slightly larger companies than maybe we do. And to then like, right, okay, how do we help each other? And I think for anyone out there, it is just asking those questions, even like whatever questions they are. Like, there's no stupid questions. And like, I like your approach of, like, you do a lot more, obviously. You do like a lot of analysis within like the treasuries of these businesses, and like look at it. And it's not just like coming in and being like, you need Bitcoin on here. And like, it's looking at the whole management of it and the treasury. And I think that's the important part of it. And it's like, okay, then we can help you learn about Bitcoin over that time, and why potentially even a little bit could make your business more resilient.
And it's not always going to be easy, because a lot of people have read headlines in the past. So I think it's important like with everything new that comes along, right? Even, with AI, and it's important to keep an open mind as to what it could mean. Maybe the headlines aren't always correct. And that, can be difficult. If you're in a business at the moment where you're really passionate about resilience, and maybe Bitcoin as well, but then maybe other people, influential people in the company, are dead against it. It's trying to trying to understand why they are. We're in that the adoption curve wise. I think we are. I've been talking to Daniel Batten quite a lot recently. We've got we're at that chasm point, right? So where the early adopters have adopted, and often the early adopters will do things just because it's interesting. The early majority really want to see the benefit to them and their company, their charity, before they start adopting. So I think in some ways we need to talk less about Bitcoin itself and more about find out what problems people have got, or what problems may occur because of the fragile monetary system we have, and how can we then solve those problems. The fact this is called Bitcoin is kind of is a side issue, really. We should be focusing on helping people solve their problems.
Nice. I like that. That's a good way to end it. Help people solve their problems. And that's, it's making them aware of the problem and then laying out, okay, here are some potential solutions to that. Is the way that we approach it. Wow, that was awesome. Thank you, so much for coming on again. I'm sure you will be back on, maybe even later this year. Depends what happens in the industry. I'm sure a lot will happen, but I'll put all your contact details and everything. If anyone wants to reach out and is like, oh, that's my business, I could do with this. I'll put that all in the description, so it's just super easy for people. But yeah, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Jordan.